Hello, my name is Kanaz File, and thank you for joining us. And today we are talking about the death of Charlie Kirk and what it means for the future of America. As you've probably heard by now, Charlie Kirk was assassinated on September 10th, 2025. You also know quite a few people have lost their jobs after gloating about Charlie's death online. Now, is this the death knell of wokeness? Is this the final nail in the coffin of social justice warfare? Or is it just a speed bump on the inevitable road to cultural Marxism? As you probably know, I'm a doomer. I tend to take a pessimistic outlook to the future. With my friend Anaf Ibn Kais, we run a podcast called Eurabiamania, which discusses doom regularly. However, I can't really say this is doom for either because, simply put, the jury is still out. We don't really know for certain what's going to happen until it happens. As Yogi Berra used to tell us, it's difficult to predict anything, especially the future. But we might not see the future just yet, but Charlie Kirk's assassination has really cast a cold light on our current political climate. So instead of making predictions, let's start by seeing what we find scurrying about when we look at that light. The first thing that we'll see, and it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody, is reactions have been really divided between the right and the left. However, an important thing to note is that Charlie Kirk's martyrdom has brought the right together. Even the nationalists, the groypers, the chanters, the far-right fringe dwellers considered Charlie Kirk to be a Zionist cuck, a paid shield for the do-nothing right Republican and name-only party, etc. Even they've come to pay tribute to his memory, and they genuinely think this is a horrible thing. And I think there's a good bit of fear involved in that, truth be told. Charlie Kirk was one of the most mild-mannered, milquetoast Republicans you could find. He went out of his way to be polite to people. He was, most of what he believed would be a bit to the left of George W. Bush. I mean, he is a very standard center-leaning Republican. He's also Christian, which upset a lot of people, but that's neither here nor there. The fact is, if a guy like Charlie Kirk can get shot for his political opinions, and if thousands, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are going to tap dance on his grave, that really means that nobody who's to the left of the danger hairs is safe, and that really, nothing brings people together like a shared sense of danger. These divisions are probably going to come into play again shortly. There are real political differences between a Charlie Kirk and a Nick Fuentes or an Andrew Anglin. But right now, there's a feeling of shared grief, shared anger, and shared fear. And that, as I noted earlier, that will give rise to shared communications and shared cooperation. I'm sure we all remember when Antifa and BLM became the street shock troops for the Democratic Party a few years back. It's not out of the realm of possibility that we could see a lot of groups that have really been loathed joining the Republican mainstream. I mean, what the hell are they going to do? They're going to say, oh, look, the Republicans are being Nazis. Man, you've been saying that for how many years now? You can only scream that the sky is falling so many times before people stop believing you, or more to the point, before people stop caring. Now, if Kirk's death has brought the right together, it's opened up some pretty big fractures on what used to be a unified leftist front. Most mainstream leftists and Democrats. Now, they've taken pains to remind us of Charlie Kirk's alleged history of all kinds of isms and phobias, but they've offered at least token condolences and finger waggling about gun violence. I mean, it's really important to note that they call it gun violence. They don't call it what it is, which is a political assassination. They dance around that topic, and then they go on to say, well, this wouldn't have happened if we had banned guns. Well, of course, it would have happened, but in any event, however they may phrase it, the folks, what I call the terminally online left, has taken to tap dancing on Charlie Kirk's grave. They've just, we're glad he's dead. We should have killed his wife and kids. Rest in piss. All kinds, every foul thing you can think of that you could say about a dead person, they've said. And this has led to a lot of blowbacks. It's easy to understand how they got confused. For years, they've received nothing but accolades for all their antics. Trump is a Nazi. Trump has tiny hands. Trump is a Nazi with tiny hands. We should 8647. All of this stuff has been applauded and celebrated, and all of a sudden the rules of the game have changed, and these people are just shocked to discover that their employers are unimpressed by their online behavior and no longer want to have them on their work team. Well, these are the same people who told us that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences, and in a move that Saul Alinsky would applaud the right for, they're being held accountable to their own standards. What Alinsky said, use your opponent's rules against them. Cancel culture started with the left, and now the right has discovered they can pick this weapon up and they can use it to get random people fired and to instill a sense of fear in their enemies, and they're taking advantage of it. So you're probably going to see this going on for some time. It's now been normalized on the right to do something the left has been doing for years. It's now okay to contact somebody's employer to get them fired. It's now okay to contact someone's neighbors and let them know, hey, you live next to a psycho who's advocating murder for people whose political opinions they disagree with. And the left fell into a really common trap here. They've lived in an echo bubble, and they assumed that there were only two kinds of people in the world. There were good people like them, and there were evil Nazi fascists. And it turns out there's a very large center who may like Charlie Kirk, may dislike Charlie Kirk, but who are generally horrified by the idea of political assassinations. And when they see people cheering for them, they tend to have a strong negative reaction. They didn't anticipate this, and now they're discovering that the universal consensus they thought they had, the universal consensus that the left worked so hard to create, they're finding out there is no universal consensus, and that, as a matter of fact, they are a fairly small and marginalized group. Now, we are also seeing the left and the right are both trying very hard to assign Tyler Robinson his rightful place. They both want to explain him because, man is the rational animal. We need to have some logical explanation for this. And we also need to distance ourselves from people who do bad things. So we can both become advocates of the no true Scotsman fans. No true leftist would do something like that. They've worked very hard to say, well, Tyler Robinson was really a MAGA supporter. He shot Charlie Kirk because Kirk was too centrist. This has nothing to do with the left. I mean, people will say this even as they cheer on Kirk's shooting. They're happy Kirk got shot, but they don't want to get their hands dirty by admitting that their side was involved with it. Of course, the right tries to cast Robinson as a dedicated Antifa member who was radicalized by left-wing Discord hatred. They're probably a bit closer to the truth than the left is on this one. But I think the best answer I've heard so far would be that Tyler Robinson's assassination was essentially a great big shit post. I mean, right down to the meme slogan scratched into his bullets. I don't know if his ideas map well onto any particular political school, and why would you expect they would? We're talking about a 22-year-old furry who just shot a stranger. Do you honestly expect this guy is going to have anything but fragmentary and inconsistent beliefs? And again, we have the problem here that we're still trying to look at this through a very polarized lens. It's the Manichaean view. It's good. Is this good or is this evil? Everything that I don't like gets tossed into my Jungian shadow. There's no dissonance in the world. There's no ambiguity. And there's something comfortable about a black and white world. I mean, there's a reason we used to watch movies where the bad guys all had black hats on and the good guys all had white hats on. We like a simple world. But thinking that we live in a simple world doesn't really help you to understand what drives people to shoot political opponents. So, what do I think drove Tyler Robinson to shoot Charlie Kirk? Okay, for starters, I think we can take a look at the internet. It's easy to say the internet gave everybody a voice. It's probably more accurate to say it gave everybody a pencil and a great big bathroom wall they could scrawl obscenities on. I'm an old timer. I was on the internet when it was still FidoNet and Usenet. We really hoped at that time, we really believed all these worldwide networks and all this openness to say whatever you want and share any kind of information, no matter how controversial, was going to bring about a new age of peaceful, civilized discourse. Whoo, boy, were we wrong. We were shocked, just shocked to discover our new toy fed the id more than it fed the superego. But even then, we really didn't have an idea of just how bad things could get. Well, how bad did things get? Spend a few minutes on any major social media outlet. You're going to hear calls for shooting elected officials, people who want to throw pedophiles into wood chippers, people who think we should start lynching criminals without trial or after torturing them enough. And you're also going to see a lot of people calling, they're going to see the FBI, local police departments, a bunch of other people who really don't give a shit about what random trolls say on the internet. And an important thing here, that I'm going to develop in some more detail in a bit is both of these groups, the people that are screaming for the police and the people that are screaming for mass executions, are sending out signals in the hopes that somebody else will do the dirty work they are unwilling to do. And a lot of people are aware of this. You'll hear a lot of complaints that the right is full of people who will talk a good game, but they're not going to use those gun collections, but masturbation, mental or otherwise. And the critics aren't entirely wrong, but they're looking at a tainted sample. The vast majority of social media tough guys on any side of the political spectrum are all bark and no bite. For them, the internet is a place to blow off steam. They wouldn't know what to do with a revolution if it were dropped in their laps. You hear a lot of stuff about how social media is responsible for inflaming tensions, how the internet has caused an unprecedented degree of polarization, and I don't think I could really argue against that, but I could also make an argument that social media by and large does more to defuse violence than to encourage it. And yeah, we hear about stochastic terrorism, all the dangers of hate speech, how we're 15 minutes away from a Nazi takeover, yada yada. But stop and think about this. For every lone gunman, how many millions of people think that they're making a difference in the world by signing online petitions, standing with whatever cause is popular this week, and adding flags, emojis, and frames to their social media profiles? And ultimately, the internet is an illusion. Chat rooms and forums give us the illusion of community and the illusion of power. I mean, we type words at people who type words back at us. We create personas that we mistake for ourselves. We identify ourselves by our illnesses, by our political leanings, by our gender, by our sexuality, by our favorite celebrities. And in doing so, we reduce ourselves to a collection of data points as we outsource our sentience to pseudo-sentient machines. And a lot of people really don't realize that. One of the things that cost the Democrats the 2024 election is their strategists went on Twitter, they went on Reddit, they went on social media, and they decided that the things that were most important for Americans were trans rights, LGBT rights, and more wokeness. And they forgot that social media algorithms reward the loudest and the most controversial participants. You'll get just as much of a boost on social media if you write something that has hundreds of people screaming at you as you will if you got hundreds of people clapping you on the back and telling you, hey, great job, I agree 100%. So when they looked at the most prominent discussions, they were looking at the most controversial discussions, not the most widely accepted ones. And because they leaned hard into the controversy, and because they ignored everybody who tried to tell them maybe you should turn to the center because they trusted the algorithm. They didn't tell who am I going to trust, the algorithm or your lion eyes. And so what happened is Trump 2.0. If we go to Reddit and Blue Sky and we assume that this is representative of how the American public feels, we're going to find ourselves in a place where we make the same mistakes and our political trajectory follows the same path as the Democratic Party in 2024. The war, am I thinking of a war? Well, I think there'll be a war. It may be live streamed, but it won't be televised. I the war is going to take place where it always does, in the street. Charlie Kirk may be the chosen martyr for one or more of the fighting factions, but we're not yet at a point where things have heated up to pitched battles. And yes, I did say not yet. I think it is entirely possible we could get pitched battles in the not too distant future. And well, what might trigger our war? Okay, let's take a look at our potential failure points. Failure point number one is that we live in an electoral democracy, and that's not a failure point in and of itself. In fact, it's a good way to avoid bloody armed conflict and civil wars. But an electoral democracy only works if you accept one shared agreement. We will honor the results of this election even if our side loses. Now, I'm not saying every election is sparkling clean. We all know better than that. We know people cheat in elections, including presidential elections. Probably the most recent example of that would be the 1960 Kennedy-Nixon election. There was a lot of controversy about Kennedy's win. There were a lot of people encouraged Nixon to contest the election, take it to the Supreme Court. But Nixon conceded because he understood how destabilizing that could be. Because he conceded, he wound up winning the election in 1968. Let's wind forward to 2016. Hillary Clinton ran what could most charitably be described as a bad campaign. There were a lot of things going against her. For the record, I think Hillary Clinton is a very bright woman. I think Hillary Clinton probably scores higher on IQ tests than Trump. I think, many people score higher on IQ tests than Donald Trump. But Hillary didn't run a good campaign. Hillary doesn't really have a lot of charisma. You may have noticed the Democratic Party tends to do that a lot. We wound up with Biden. After Hillary Clinton, we wound up with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, two people who are not as smart as Hillary Clinton, but no more charismatic. And however, nobody conceded. What we got was a big push explaining that there was Russiagate, Russian interference. Vladimir Putin had stolen the election from Hillary Clinton and put a Putin puppet, Donald Trump, in the White House. Now, do I think that Russia may have been interfered with the election? In fact, let me put it this way. I would be really surprised if they didn't have their fingers in the pie in the 2016 election. I mean, the United States certainly gets involved in lots of foreign elections. It would be naive to assume that Russia, China, other players didn't try to massage the election to make it go their way. Now, do I believe that Donald Trump won the 2016 election solely or even largely because of Russian interference? No, I do not. I think he won because he was simply a more charismatic candidate, and charisma makes a big difference when you've got somebody running for president. In 2020, we see Trump lose in what a majority of his followers considered and still consider to be a stolen election. there certainly were a lot of statistical weirdness going on about within the 2020 election, and it did kind of smell fishy, got to admit it. But I don't know for certain whether or not, like, Biden was put into office through ballot stuffing. But that may not be real important because a significant chunk of Republicans decided that that was in fact the case. Some of them were even angry enough to go into the Capitol building and protest about it. And with that, we had two elections which ended with enormous controversy about whether or not they were stolen. 2024, we start hearing that Elon Musk had used Starlink to rig voting machines. I got to admit, this received a lot less attention than Russiagate did in 2016. The mainstream media generally did not push the Trump stole the election response. However, I'd also note that in 2024, the media's opinion was considerably less important than it was in 2016, so that might not really help. What the point here we've got is we now have a significant chunk of the American population on both sides who will only accept the results of the election if their candidate wins. And that is a recipe for disaster for any electoral democracy. Well, what else do we have to worry about? Well, we've come to a point where many, perhaps most politically active people view the other side not just as misguided, but as actively evil. There's no political reward in working with the opposing team to get legislation passed. We've seen ongoing legal gridlock, governmental inaction, and we've also seen a growing number of people asking, why should we tolerate an actively evil political party in our land of freedom and democracy? We're getting the calls for a strong leader who will take care of the bad guys and fix the problem. The only thing we're disagreeing on is who the bad guys are. Trump is already making noises about going after the billionaires who are supporting Antifa, declaring Antifa a terrorist organization, rooting out, quote, violent liberals, unquote. There's a lot of fears, and frankly, most of those fears are well-founded, that this is going to be used to take out, quote, anti-Semites, unquote, who are critical of Israel's response in Palestine. Now, that's all true, but again, no smart politician or no politician who's smart enough to listen to his cabinet will pass up the opportunity to gain more political power during a crisis. So we could expect that. And the problem now is if Donald Trump starts arresting, if George Soros and his family are frog marched out of their mansion in handcuffs along with the squad, a significant number of Trump supporters will cheer and say it's about time. If a coup happens, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are shot down, and a new party, the Democrats declare power under emergency measures, there will be a lot of people who are cheering for their deaths, just like there were people who were cheering for Charlie Kirk. And you know what, folks? When a nation yearns for a tyrant, they invariably get one. And Maybe the most common trigger for civil warfare is economic collapse. Europe is in the middle of a debt crisis. American debt's at 36 trillion and it's rising every day. The Great Depression left living memory about a decade or two ago. We've experienced economic slowdowns. Some of us, I'm old enough to remember the Rust Belt, but nobody alive knows or remembers what a global economic crash looks like. However, I do trust that you're familiar with how the Weimar Republic ends. And I've predicted for a while that the global American empire's collapse will hit the United States the way the Soviet Union's fall hit Russia. Between 1991 and 1998, Russia's GDP contracted over 40%. It wasn't until the mid 2000s, not till over 15 years later, before the GDP returned to the standard of living you saw in the final days of the Soviet Union. And as that was happening, a certain Mr. Putin cemented his hold on power, and as of June 2025, he had an 86% approval rating among the Russian people. So when an economic collapse comes, people will support anybody who betters their living conditions, and they're not really going to worry about silly things like freedom of speech or other nuances. If we saw an economic collapse or a government coup, we certainly would see widespread street protests at first. Now, if somebody stops a few of those protests, Tiananmen style, we'll see an end to street protesting pretty soon. My guess would be once the number of protester deaths and injuries hit three figures, most Americans will not have the stomach to go out waving signs knowing that they might get shot. But that doesn't mean that the mass protests have stopped and so everything is back to normal. We will definitely see a resistance. So what would that resistance look like? What would that civil war look like? Well, let's think about that. First thing I'd note is that it doesn't take a lot of shootings to chill commentary. Right now, Charlie Kirk's death has galvanized lots of conservative Americans. Kill another 5 or 6 popular conservative influencers and you'll see lots of Gab and Rumble channels going silent. Now, you take out 50 or 60 conservative influencers, you might just see Gab and Rumble closing their doors. But now again, if you silence public dissent, you're going to soon find yourself dealing with private rebellion. And let's be fair, the people who were running their keyboards on social media were never going to escalate to violence, and they were certainly not going to risk their lives as soon as their jobs or their lives are on the line. Without their safety valve, without their dopamine fix, they'll turn to drink, they'll argue with their families, they'll engage in risky behaviors, they'll do whatever they need to do to get their dopamine fix. Social media will become a much calmer place once you actually have a tyranny in place. Remember, treason doth never prosper, and what is the reason? If it doth prosper, none dare call it treason. Where the action will go is it will turn to more private channels like Discord. You're going to find people who are not only more committed to a revolution, they're harder to track. Take a look at 764. a gang of child porn trading exhibitionists. We've seen a few members jailed, including the founder, but that's to be expected. There still lots of 764 members out there doing 764 things? Absolutely. We know that Tyler Robinson talked politics in a few Discord channels. He may even have shared his plans with other members. He may have gotten advice from other members. It's possible a dragnet will sweep up one or two people that were loosely or tightly connected to him, but we'll likely never know exactly who was involved or when. And what can you do in terms of real life actions? Well, the first thing I'd note is the internet makes it easy to find addresses. Now, you got some federal officials who have Secret Service protection. You do some of the right online searches, and you'll soon have not just a list of that official's employees, you'll have a pretty good list of that official's family members, where their kids go to college, stuff like that. Now, if you want to start targeting state officials, mayors, town councils, school boards, or HOA leaders, they got no Secret Service protection. You know who else doesn't have Secret Service protection? Online loudmouths with a couple hundred followers. And am I condoning this type of violence? Well, my friend, do you honestly think Tyler Robinson would have left his grandfather's 30-06 Mauser in the closet if I had wagged my finger sternly at him and said, Tyler, violence is not the answer? Finding soft targets is easy. Where it gets difficult is finding people who have the stomach or the psychological illnesses to take advantage of that information and do something that most people find appalling. If you don't have that stomach or those weaknesses, nobody is ever going to talk you into an assassination. If you got the stomach for it, there's nobody who's ever going to talk you out of it. Once those killings start, I don't expect you'll see no discussions of political stuff on social media. I even expect you'll find private channels like you do on Telegram dedicated to making America great again, to occupying democracy, to other such similar nonsense. You'll have occasional arrests of particularly stupid Fed posters. You'll have the FBI releasing celebratory stories about how they stopped terrorism at the last minute thanks to the FBI's crack security team. But you'll also have occasional incidents. I don't expect you'll be seeing people get shot every day, not even every week. You'll see it happen enough to ensure that there's a state of constant fear. Because again, that's the point of terrorism, to make people terrified, to make them afraid. You start seeing things like that, you're going to see, again, what you see is a vicious circle. You will see people who are frightened. They give government more power to protect them. The government fails to protect them. The government's ham-handed techniques anger more people, and you start seeing more support for the resistance. Keep in mind, while this is going on, as I noted earlier, you're going to be looking at an ongoing economic crisis. And that's just going to add more fuel to the fire, more discontent with the government. This could go on for years until, again, somebody comes to power. When the failing establishment strongmen will be replaced by the toughest rebel strongmen. Will you get a Fidel Castro? Will you get a Francisco Franco? Hey, that's up to the fates. Whoever you get, my guess is 50% of the population will be bitterly disappointed, if too frightened to say anything about it, and the other 50% will feel that way a few months later. Is there any way we can cool this down? Is there any way we can stop these tensions? Well, Charlie Kirk was trying to do just that, and we see how it turned out for him. I'm frankly not sure that we can escape this death spiral. However, I think that we must try. Because if we don't, things are going to get much worse than we imagined. Until next time, this is Kanaz Filan. Check out my Substack, Notes from the End of Time. Check out our podcast with Kanaz and Anaf Ibn Qais, Eurabiamania, and good luck and stay safe.